Thank you for joining us. This is the Mental Health Minnesota panel. We're talking a little bit about what recovery looks like during COVID. I have some special guests with us on this panel. They're three amazing ambassadors who have gone above and beyond sharing their story, helping other people share their story, and helping others realize that recovery is possible, and it isn't just possible. You can go far beyond that and become a person that you didn't even realize that you could become. So we're going to talk to our panel a little bit about their background stories first.
Hi, my name is Heather Bull, and I am living in long-term recovery. I live with depression, anxiety, ADHD, and I would say passive and sometimes a sort of a suicide ideation. So my journey started when I was 8 years old. I have what's called emetophobia, and that is the fear of vomiting myself or somebody else, seeing somebody else vomit. So in third grade, I missed 32 days of school because I was so afraid. And it's funny because we know things like claustrophobia, arachnophobia, those types of things. And it was super, there was like, when I talk about my story, I think of the 80s, like how there was no internet or, there just wasn't a lot of, and we didn't encyclopedia or libraries to get information. So my parents really did the best that they could, but they would bring me to the doctor and would describe physical ailments that I had. And looking back, it was just really textbook anxiety, phobias. And because I didn't get the help that I needed, I started using drugs and alcohol to cope when I was 14. And I like to say it worked until it didn't, right? Because it was a fast and easy fix. So it really felt like, wow, I found what I was missing all my life, not really knowing how toxic and awful it actually really was. So I got married when I was 24, and I decided to go to get sober. So I quit everything cold turkey and got really dedicated into my mental health journey. And I found that I was really frustrated with I would go from one therapist to the other, or my family practice doctor. I just kept going back and forth, and they would prescribe one medication to the next. And it was a really long, a trial and error type time for me. And I had got pregnant with our first kid shortly after our wedding, and postpartum depression and anxiety was so severe for me. I remember getting help for the first time when I was 6 weeks postpartum with my son, because it was the first time I had somebody, it was a questionnaire to fill out about postpartum. And I felt a little hopeful at that time that I was going to get some of the help. And it wasn't shortly thereafter we got pregnant with our second child. And back then, I went off things. Like I say back then, my oldest is 10. So even 10 years ago, doctors recommended, not all, but mine recommended going off your medication during pregnancy. So I did that. And this time after having my second son, I had DMER, which stands for dysphoric milk rejection, when I breastfed. And now I know it's correlated to a dopamine and serotonin deficiency and severe postpartum depression. I had 4 to 6 panic attacks a day. Most of them happened at night, waking me up from the little sleep that I was getting. And I started engaging in some self-harm behaviors because I was trying to ground myself in that moment and try to bring myself to what felt like something real. And that was super scary and shameful too, because I didn't even really understand what I was doing. I just know that it was helping me cope because I didn't have the skill set that I desperately needed. And in 2014, I had attempted to take my life because I just couldn't do it anymore. And I'm so thankful that I can stand here today and say that I'm a suicide survivor, and I advocate and my whole life to try to help people on this journey, because I'm just so thankful that I had, was blessed to have what I feel like is a second chance. And we did have a third child. Sometimes I think, wow, like going through all of that. But this time it was different because I decided to stay on my medication, and I went and found some doctors who supported that, and I really educated myself. So after the birth of her, I felt so good because I was on that steady medication, and I learned to really search for a psychiatrist that fit and aligned with the visions that I had for my life, and a therapist. I think that there was maybe 4 or 5 in my life that I tried, and I found one that was really, really good. And from there, things started to feel hopeful. And I was standing in the bathroom, scrolling Facebook, and I saw an article on being a certified peer support specialist. So I said, and the first prerequisite was you have to have a diagnosed mental illness. And I said, score, like I have that, right? Like, and then be in recovery. And at that point I was in recovery, and I went through the program, and I decided to be not a public speaker, but a professional speaker. And that is where I started doing a lot of work for Mental Health Minnesota as an ambassador, speaking all over, just sharing my story. And today I own not 1, but 2 businesses that support women and men on their mental health journey. We are a certified peer support ran business. I have Heal Her Peer Support in the Hive. And I do, before COVID, professional speaking. Now it's done in this format, which is still great. And I did have a significant, I would say in my journey, what I call, not necessarily, I don't like using the word relapse, because I believe breakdowns are the opportunity for breakthroughs. It's really a lot of feedback. But I will tell you that I had a really difficult time in 2020 with my mental health. And sometimes I think we forget when we felt good for so long. It's like recognizing the signs, the symptoms, and letting go of that. I don't know, for me, it was like, hey, I know I got this in check, like my ego or whatever. And I needed to go back to the basics. I needed to go back and start seeing my therapist regularly. I needed to be, getting good sleep, nutrition, fitness. I do drink now selectively, and I found that I was self-medicating a little bit during that time, and I recognized it and nipped it in the bud right away, because it was just slipping back into those old ways. And it was okay, because I believe we have these ups and downs, and again, using it as feedback, and leaning in on my supportive circle and not self-isolating, because that's traditionally what I would have done. And so leaning in on my circle and being honest with myself to what I needed, and being radical about my self-care. I mean, it had to go up to the top, because I couldn't give everybody what was left of me. I had to give the best of me, and that was putting myself first, even if it felt weird with like my kids home distant learning, and if that meant 10 minutes in the bathroom to have a good cry, or journaling, meditating, whatever it was. I really was focusing on that. So long-term recovery is possible. I've been on this journey since I was 8 years old. I'm 37. I still have those ups and downs and the symptoms of living with a mental health condition. And I really, really believe if you want to look up a certified peer support specialist, it was one of the biggest catalysts for healing in my journey, to be able to take my pain and turn it into passion and power for other people. I highly recommend it. Finding different ways to connect with people who have similar life experiences. I think that I searched within people that didn't have those similar experiences, and I thought, why are we not jiving, relating? And I found out they're not wrong or bad people. You just need to find people that speak your language a little bit more. And I think that's people who have lived experience. So we're rooting for you, whoever's watching this. And if you're feeling down, the before stage 4, I love using that the just checking yourself. If it's 2 weeks, 2 areas of your life, you could be in stage 2 already, and keep advocating for yourself and wanting to just be the best version of you. And even if that means cutting some things back and just simplifying to really feel what it is that you need.
Thank you,
Thank
Heather.
you.
That was fantastic.
Yeah, thank you for sharing.
You're welcome.
Ryan, would you like to go next?
Yeah. My name is Ryan Rasmussen, and I grew up right in the suburbs of St. Paul. I'm actually not too far. I've kind of reverted, gone this full circle and now made home to where I grew up, really close. And when I was growing up, my parents, I was the only child that my biological parents had, and I had a great upbringing. Super lucky. I think back to the 80s too, right? Totally. When you said that, um, when I think of my childhood, totally 80s. Um, I grew up in the suburbs and never needed or wanted really for anything. A really, really great childhood until my parents got divorced when I was 8 years old. And it was the right thing. They weren't happy. It wasn't a happy household, kind of the family dynamic. And unfortunately, when they got divorced, it left me kind of vulnerable being the only child in the house. And due in part to that vulnerability, I became a victim of repeated childhood sexual trauma. And during that trauma experiences, drugs and alcohol were introduced at a pretty young age. So as I grew up and I gravitated towards other people, I gravitated towards people that also used. So I was, when I look back now, I was an addict by the time I was 14 years old. All my social activities involved drugs and alcohol. And at 20 years old, I told my family about my trauma history. And, again, having a great family, even getting this really hard news, they were amazingly supportive and like jumped up into action the best that they knew how. The first thing that they did was find me a therapist to go to. And after a couple of sessions of therapy, we get to know each other. Is this a good fit? My therapist told me that I needed to stop using in order to continue therapy. Therapy just wasn't going to be effective if I was still self-medicating. So I did. I decided to quit using. And therapy really started to help, and I felt better being sober. But I didn't learn any real tools of recovery at that time. I didn't go to treatment. The only real place I had to go share was that therapy setting. With all that being said, I was able to stay sober for that period for 6 years. And even though I wasn't using, I was still experiencing the symptoms that I had from PTSD from those childhood experiences. Some of my symptoms would be isolation. I had a real, and still fight this still today. The pandemic has kind of helped with this, but a real reaction to strangers touching me or even kind of getting within my little personal circle. I had an extremely low self-esteem, and it created like a real distrust within other people. And I think the worst thing, that happened through childhood trauma is that I blamed myself, right? And I lived with a lot of shame from what had happened to me as a child. Some years later, I was in college and I was working at a bar, and I would meet my future wife there. I was still sober, but she wasn't. And over time, I found that she had a similar trauma history to what I did, and that connection really drew us together. I felt like it was someone that I could kind of share a really bad experience with, and it kind of understood how I felt and how I saw the world. And shortly after dating, we would start to share a 6-pack on a weekend, and over time, we would drink more and more often. And of course, it started slowly, but like any addict, it really started to snowball. And as I look back now, I can see that I started using substances again to cope with those PTSD symptoms and my overall social discomforts. A year into that relationship, my wife at the time was in a accident on the city bus, and she had injured her back, and she was referred to a pain clinic, which was pretty popular back then. And at her initial appointment, she was prescribed an obnoxious amount of pain medicine. There was never any talk of any type of therapy or surgery. It was right to pills. So of course, being an addict, I would begin to dip into her pain meds, and soon we were both opiate addicts together. And as our tolerance rose, her prescriptions wouldn't be enough. So we both would doctor shop, and eventually we started buying pills on the street until she could get that next prescription filled. And I tried heroin for the first time shortly before my son was born. Heroin was cheaper and a more intense high than the pills were. And I was high the day my son was born. I was high on my wedding day. I was high on my son's first birthday. And I was high every day for far too many years. And eventually I lost everything. We lost our house. We'd started a small business that we had lost. And child protection had eventually come to check on my son's welfare. And one night I was driving a friend's car, pulled over in North Minneapolis. I got ticketed. I got my 8th of a total of 9 driving on suspended license. And this was an interesting moment because the police were always kind of someone we stayed away from, right? Enemy's not the right word, but when you're living that lifestyle, you see them in a different light. But that officer had pulled me up to the side. They found needles in the car, and he told me that I looked like I was close to death and that I needed to seek out help. And he said that there were hospitals in the Twin Cities that help opiate addicts detox safely from heroin or pills. And for some reason, that conversation made a real difference to me. And when I look back, that was really the first time that I seriously started to consider recovery in my life again. And from my perspective, that cop had the humanity to see that I was hurting and the compassion to say something. And to this day, I see it as a key moment in the progression towards my recovery. And I wanted help, but my wife at the time just didn't. And I spent weeks trying to talk to her about a plan for us both to go in and get the help that we needed. Finally, I called my mom and I asked for her help. And I told her, well, she'd already known that I was an addict. My mom took my 4-year-old son at the time, and we made plans for me to get into a detox bed. A week later, she picked me up early in the morning, drove me to the hospital. It was Unity Hospital. We knew that they had an open bed, and I could start on Suboxone to help me wean off of opiates in a safe and comfortable way. So I met with the intake administrator in the ER, and I'm 6'3", and my hair was really long and my beard was overgrown. I had a gray tint to my skin, and I weighed 149 pounds at that time. I had track marks on both arms, my hands, my hips. I was extremely depressed, a real low point, a real emotional bottom in my life. And my life had completely fallen apart. And the intake worker there thought I was homeless and looking for a bed to get out of the cold on a February. It was late February. And I was homeless, but this time I wanted help. So the ER doctor, it's a whole process, at least it was back then. The ER doctor came back in and he had to release me. And the guy felt terrible, right? He took a few minutes. He had let me know that he had checked the schedule, and the next Tuesday was a different intake worker. And if I could survive the week, he almost pleaded with me to come back and try again the next week. And I was in shock. I was a full-blown junkie, finally wanted and truly needed help, and I'd been turned away at a hospital. So I left the hospital, and I met back up with my wife, made plans with my family to go back to the hospital that next Tuesday. We woke up that next Tuesday morning to a phone call, answered the phone. It was a friend telling us that our main drug dealer had been shot and killed the night before. It's a super scary moment. My wife had been there a couple hours before the incident had happened and thought, way too close to home. Super violent attack on someone we knew pretty well. So it was really scary. So I was motivated again to get back into the hospital. So I left the flop house where I was staying, met up with my mom again, and she drove me back to the hospital. And this time I made it through the intake, and I was allowed up into the medical detox. And it's hard to say these things, but I really feel without Suboxone that I don't know how successful I would have been. I feel like it's helped me stay sober to this day. I've been on Suboxone for 7 years and currently tapering my way down. I'm at a really low level now, which I'm quite proud of. Once I got up into the detox, the staff was just amazing. The nurses in the counseling staff that was up there were really caring and understanding human beings. And on the fourth day I was in detox, my child protection worker finally was able to track me down, and I signed temporary custody of my son over to the county. And we made a treatment plan, kind of a path to get my boy back. And when we finished the treatment plan, I walked her. It was a locked area in the hospital. I walked her back to the front door. And she told me that she didn't have any hope for me to get my son back because people like me don't recover. Right? Obviously, taken it back 4 days sober from a pretty lengthy heroin addiction. It really gave me that just saying that really gave me a really hopeless feeling. But I was in that detox for 10 days. Prior to being transferred to inpatient treatment, I kind of got the opposite conversation from one of the counselors in the hospital. He pulled me into his office just to have a quick conversation between him and I. And he told me that I can do this and I can get clean, I can get my son back, and I can go on and live a good life. And that conversation, thankfully, I was able to take with me and carry with me. It really planted a seed of hope. I never know, does he remember me? Did he do that for everybody? But every year I still call. Unity doesn't have this program anymore, but they do have a CD, chemical dependency unit. And I leave a message hoping that counselor will get my message every March 4th on the day that I went in or was accepted in. I spent 94 days in inpatient treatment. And this time I did learn the tools of recovery. We had 8 hours of meetings every day. And when I look back, the camaraderie that I had with my fellow addicts was equal or even more powerful to me than the time I had with staff. I graduated from treatment, continued with my child protection and family court. And when I got out of treatment, the Hennepin County homicide detectives had found me, questioned me about the drug dealer's murder. And for my first year of recovery, I was a suspect and eventually a witness in that investigation. And through that investigation, I found out that my wife was involved in that murder. She was eventually arrested, charged, convicted of second-degree murder. She got out November of last year. She did 7 of her 10-year sentence, and she's doing well. She just started reconnecting with our son. And despite the extreme stress of all that going on in my life, I really was determined to continue in recovery. So the next step was aftercare treatment, and I continued with aftercare. I stayed in outpatient treatment for another 4 months, and I worked with the same therapist for 3.5 years. And that was the therapist that had suggested to me to look into becoming a certified peer specialist. And I'd never worked in social services, but I thought that using my experiences with mental health and chemical dependency, that I could not only help others, but it could help me on my recovery journey. So I did the training and have been a peer for the last 4 or 5 years. And I celebrated 7 years in recovery last March. So this March will be 8. I divorced my ex-wife. Just in hindsight, our relationship was really based on, that childhood trauma that we shared. And it was a really dysfunctional and unhealthy marriage. Today I have custody of my son back. I'm in a healthy relationship with the woman I married last September. She's just been amazing. We have a blended family now. And I work at an agency in St. Paul. I do homeless outreach to the unsheltered people experiencing homelessness in St. Paul. It's been a challenging but rewarding career. To this day, I still struggle. I still struggle with nightmares every night. It's one of the rare things that I haven't been able to kind of figure out. And it's just distressing memories that have stayed with me. But most of my other symptoms I've been able to work through, mostly in therapy. A lot of chemical dependency groups and support groups. I have an amazing family, amazing home life, which obviously makes life really good. But I am better equipped now to deal with my, chemical dependency issues and my PTSD from childhood trauma than I'd ever been. And really, I'm happy and healthy. In COVID, if we come back to COVID and like the year has been, I started my job. It's about a year ago. I transferred from one team to another. And COVID on the unsheltered population has been really, really tough. Last year at this time, there was 28 humans sleeping outside in St. Paul. This year, there's upwards of 350. So our team hasn't grown, but the unsheltered population really has. So the stress of that has been challenging. So self-care has been really important. Our agency really supports us with that. We get a lot of time off. We're encouraged to take it. Grateful to have a really good home life here. My partner also works in social services. So to be able to come home and share in kind of a safe place with someone that understands has been really helpful. But it's been a challenging year, but also on another note, a really good year kind of personally. For us, it's been a really good year. We bought a house. Red, my son, has made the A honor roll every quarter in middle school, and we're really proud of him. He also, right, trauma kind of leads to trauma. So my trauma history then down the road led to him having a trauma history in his childhood. And we've had to deal with that through therapy and support. He had he's in a good school district, and they have support groups there, which he engages in. But homeschooling, he's adapted really well. Super grateful for that. I know that not every family has the opportunity to do that, but he's done really well.
Thank you, Ryan. I appreciate you sharing your story. Sam, are you ready to go?
Yeah. I live with depression, anxiety, ADHD, and PTSD. My issues, they really started when I was younger, but they didn't really pop out until high school. When I was 17, I was sexually assaulted, and I also blacked it out. So for the first year after that happened, I didn't really remember much. And then shortly after I was assaulted, I attempted to commit suicide. And it was almost exactly 11 years ago on New Year's Eve that happened. And I'm really glad I'm still here. It was just quite the experience. I'm still really close with a lot of the people that I was in there with, and we consider each other to be like siblings. We always know we have each other no matter what. But after that happened, I finished high school. I just wanted to get out of my hometown and have all the freedom, that a college freshman would have. And I enjoyed being a college freshman a little too much. I would abuse my medication, not take my medication, and I drank a lot. And it was shortly before the end of my freshman year, I started to get those memories of what happened back. So I started therapy. I did a few, intensive outpatient programs throughout the next 4 years, but nothing seemed to stick. And I continued the partying and the abusing the medication. And finally, during my 4th year of school, I overdosed again and decided it was time to come home. So I came home. I started pulling myself together. I did another intensive outpatient program, and that's when I was diagnosed with PTSD. And that diagnosis is what really helped me start the recovery process, because before that, I just didn't understand what was going on. I didn't know why all the memories would pop up or the nightmares would happen. And it really helped me understand why I depended on abusing my medication and drinking. So throughout the next 4 years after that, I did struggle with drinking and self-harm because the memories just got to be too much. But I finally met an amazing therapist who helped me work through everything I had been through. And that was probably my breaking point into recovery, was meeting her and talking through everything I had been through and really just understanding what I had gone through. And it was in 2018, my sexual assault case was reopened. by the police department. And honestly, if I hadn't been through all the therapy I had to up at that point, I don't know if I would have survived that, but it was very much an empowering moment. I actually got an apology from the police department for what they had put me through when I first tried to report it. I ended up working with the Star Tribune and an amazing group of women who had also survived similar stories to mine, and ended up getting an article in the Associated Press, just getting to share my story. And it was probably about a year before that I got connected with Mental Health Minnesota, and talking about everything has really helped me on my journey. It's like you guys have said, it's really therapeutic. And I still struggle from time to time, but I'm better equipped to handle it. I've learned more coping mechanisms. I've learned that I can rely on people more. And I've learned to kind of quiet the voices of what I call my inner 17-year-old who's still stuck in that trauma. And 2020 was simultaneously the best and worst year of my life. At first I was like, oh, this is going to be great. I'm very much an introvert. I don't like going places. Like, I can handle this. And then June hit and I had another overdose attempt. I quit drinking and really kind of focused on self-care and talking to people when I needed it. That's been something that's never been my strong suit, that I'm still slowly getting better at. But I have an amazing husband. We got married this year, just in a little backyard ceremony, and he helps me a lot. I've learned to open up to him so much more than anybody else that I've ever opened up to. And we are currently expecting our first child, which has been up and down, an up and down experience, more with just like the anxiety and the depression. But I kind of have to separate and be like, okay, is this from being pregnant or is this from struggling with my mental health? And being able to see the two different struggles has really helped, and helped me not go down like the path where I get in a funk. When like there's been days where I've cried for like 3 days straight. And I just realized, okay, that's part of the pregnancy. This isn't depression related. You know, take a few breaths and just feel everything. And feeling my feelings has been the biggest help. And that's the best piece of advice I've ever received from my dad, is I used to just store it all inside and I didn't want anybody to see me at that weak point. But now I feel what I need to feel and I embrace those feelings, and it's really helped.
Thank you. And congratulations.
Thank you.
You all have amazing stories, and I love my job because I get to listen to your stories and I get to see people's reactions. And when the conference comes, I'll get to see the reactions of all the people when they get to hear how amazing you three are. And you're just three of lots of ambassadors we have, and it's incredible. So some of my questions are, so in 2020, obviously this has been one heck of a year. What's been the biggest challenge for you, and what's been the biggest like relief? Like, if you could maybe answer those questions in your recovery.
Yeah, I can start. So I've learned the biggest challenge is when what I previously thought were wellness tools were taken away, having to get creative with what I could do. And then like, I love that part where Samantha said I also, feeling is healing. And then in the word emotion has the word motion. So like I had to sit in my own feelings. And that was, I think, why COVID was so hard, because I had to just sit there and be like, oh my gosh, like I can't run from this. I can't hide. I can't, distract, do this, whatever. It was just me and, the battle between the ears. So that would have been my greatest struggle. And then my biggest relief was this year, oh, relief. I think that it was learning. I really did a good job this year with boundaries, and like whether it was a personal boundary or I don't know, I just got really good at it and staying true to those healthy boundaries for I think with other relationships that maybe weren't so healthy.
I think, professionally, this has been a challenging year, right? COVID, I joined a new team, so new people, new office, new everything. And then COVID hits 2 months later. And then, we don't really know what information to trust. At the beginning, there wasn't really good information. And we were called back to work, under everybody else is under quarantine. We got called back, within a matter of days, and just adjusting, right? And being able to keep ourselves fluid, and to go out and serve the unsheltered population, which just couldn't be ignored. That was challenging. A really, really good home life, a place where I feel totally safe. It's so grateful for that. Kind of in treatment, we were taught that we can catch our negative thoughts, and in all these years later, I still find myself doing it. Catching those negative thoughts and just analyzing, where is it coming from? Is it needed? Is it not? Those little simple tricks have really helped me. And I've had a lot, as far as positives, a lot of positives. Getting married, my son doing so well. Just really proud of my wife and my son.
Thank you, Ryan. Sam?
For me, the most challenging part has been the fear of the unknown. Just because there's been so much up in the air. My parents are small business owners, so that was really rough to go through with them when everything initially started. And I'm usually more of like a, go with the flow type of person, but I've really learned that at least being able to see somewhat into the future relieves my anxiety, and not being able to do that this year was something I really had to work through. And then the biggest relief was just my support system. I grew closer with my family and my husband, and I've had friends who have been amazing helping me through all of this. And yeah, it's been quite the journey.
A majority of the people that will see this are going to be going into social work or some kind of work like that. But for anybody really, if you're going into social work, mental health work, counseling, what advice do you have for them that you think might be useful, especially after everything that you've all gone through?
My biggest piece of advice is really listen and form that connection with the people you are helping. A lot of things with mental health can be brushed off, and just kind of really listening to your client or your patient and what their needs are and the things they need help with, and just being an advocate for them, I think is huge. And just remembering like little things can kind of make a person's day.
I was going to say that educate yourself on compassion fatigue and what that actually means. And I think if you're figuring out really radically if you're introverted, extroverted, and then just getting to know yourself and what those energy needs are. I always knew I was an empath, but I didn't fully figure out what that meant until way down the road. So like radical self-care. And I always like to put the word radical because it's truly, it is at the top. I have to have myself taken care of, and not in a selfish way. It is not like a vanity thing. It's just to be able to serve my peers, serve my community, my family. And it really is. I was naive in the beginning. So having your own self-care, and it more than likely would be having your own therapist, peer support specialist, advocate for you to keep yourself accountable for that.
I second everything everybody has said, but self-care, I think I was really naive to that in the beginning too. I had some really good people on teams I've been on that really kind of helped walk me through it and teach me. But man, that first year to 18 months where you just went gung-ho and kind of put yourself in the back seat, it didn't work. So you've really had to learn how to care for yourself so then you can care for other people as well. Some of the things that I like to kind of keep in front of me when I'm working with humans is kind of meeting them where they are, right? Without judgment. Allow a lot of time for engagement. There's I had some really negative things happen kind of in my journey in recovery from quote unquote professionals. And I think that a lot of other people have too. So just allow for that engagement. Let trust just kind of be organically built. And the relationships will kind of go from there.
You guys are superstars. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thanks for being on the panel.
Yeah, I miss doing this. I mean, that's another negative of COVID, right? We don't get to do this as much.
I miss it too.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, don't worry. There's plenty of virtual conferences coming up. You all have amazing stories, and I love my job because I get to listen to your stories and I get to see people's reactions. And when the conference comes, I'll get to see the reactions of all the people when they get to hear how amazing you three are. And you're just three of lots of ambassadors we have, and it's incredible.